World History, Chapter 12, Section 4, Emergence of Japan Feudal Age, Internal, External Factors that Shaped Japan's Civilization and what characterized its feudal age, how geography set Japan apart, influence of China again, summarizing the Japanese feudal system, Tokugawa united Japan, and Zen Buddhism shaped Japanese culture. So if we look at key terms, people and places, archipelago, island chain, group of islands. There's many throughout the world. Japan happens to be one. Tsunami is a tidal wave caused by an earthquake, so it's different than normal tidal waves. It's a wave created by forces, underground forces. Shinto is a religion. Samurai Bushido we'll talk about later. So if we look at the geography, so if we look at this again, Japan is an archipelago, a set of islands, and we notice it's located close to Korea and close to China, and so there's going to be some influence there. But the key thing about the seas is it did serve to protect and isolate Japan. What that means is even though it's influenced by China, it has a tremendous amount of difference, and it's able to preserve its identity, unlike many of these other places where there's more cultural blending than we see in Japan. When we talk about forces of nature, tsunamis play a pretty important role here. And so there's a video how tsunamis work, and then in 2011 was a major tsunami in Japan, and there have been a number of them in the Philippines and India. So these are real forces, and part of it is they're located and surrounded by water is one factor. But the other thing is again, because they are in the ring of fire, this very active seismic activity, it's kind of a recipe for disaster in some ways. So if we look at early traditions, the Yamamoto clan, so Japan was divided up into a number of differing clans. And so as these clans became more powerful or less powerful, that would cause some to take over. Early on, Yamamoto clan is able to kind of control a bigger portion of Japan, and they claim to become emperors of Japan. A lot of times they are not nearly as powerful as the largest landholders, yet the emperor that is alive today in Japan is descended from the Yamamoto. So they have a long tradition of playing a role and being a big part of Japan. So religion, Shintoism, they believe that forces of nature influence things, and they worship those forces of nature, and that's what Shinto is. And if we look at the Korean connection, Japan's language is closer to Korean than it is to Chinese. If we look at Japan, Japan did a lot of trading with China. They visit China, they learn a lot from them, and then they adapt and adopt these Chinese practices to fit their own particular needs. But what we see is there's a lot of selective borrowing. They digested and modified Chinese ways. So in other words, they look at Chinese language and culture and art and all those types of things, and they pick apart bits and pieces that they like or they think that work, and they will change them and mold them to fit Japanese values. And we really see this in the Heian period, where the Heian culture looks back almost 200 years to Chinese dynasties, and they emulate that and they copy it, and you see that women shape the court. The first novel is written by a Japanese woman. The first novel in world history is written by a Japanese woman. And so this Heian aristocracy, women play a pretty big role, even though they have less power, but because they're involved in the court, because they're moving in the upper circles and they are the ones who are writing literature, they play a pretty big part. So if we look at feudalism, the way of the warrior, the Japanese society is structured a lot like European feudalism, where you had the king at the top, you had the large landowners, the daimyo and samurai. The daimyo were powerful warlords or landowners, and the samurai were like the knights, and then the vast majority were peasants. And again, a bit like medieval Europe, there's these virtues that the samurai are supposed to live by, this code of the warrior. And so that's a lot like knights and taking care of your lady and laying the coat down so women don't have to walk through puddles, those types of things. It's the same thing for samurai, and this code is called Bushido. Again, the vast majority of Japanese are peasants and artisans and merchants. Nearly 75% of the population is peasants. They provided for the needs of the samurai. Merchants are by far the lowest of those three groups. So merchants aren't highly valued in Asian culture, and we saw that in China as well. When we look at the Mongol invasion, it is these kamikaze winds, these tsunamis that kick up that actually intervene and enable Japan to hold off the Mongol invasion. So twice the Mongols tried to invade, and twice these divine winds kicked up and saved Japan from the invasion of the Mongols. So the Tokugawas, this whole warlord period is pretty long, and so this extra credits history goes through this whole long period and goes through all of it. But there's a series of steps that take place where different warlords are able to kind of slowly but surely gain a foothold over all of Japan, and it's the Tokugawas who come out at the end of this period of warring states in the best shape. And what they do to unite Japan is they take a lot of these old social order laws that had been in place for generations, and they just pass new laws that set those things in stone so that they're immovable, and it creates a very ordered and structured society. The other thing that happens is the Tokugawas take the daimyos and their families and they move them to the capital of Edo, and that way he can keep an eye on everything that they do, and that brings about the end of these warring states. And one of the things that happens after the Tokugawas is after you've gained control of Japan and you're able to kind of centralize power, the economy booms. There's better farming, more food, more people, more trade, more towns. Everything is pretty good for Japan, and they kind of flourish over the next few centuries until we get to European and American intervention. So one of the things that we also see is that Buddhism plays a big role. So Shintoism is there, but also Buddhism is introduced from China, and you can see this playing a big impact. And so Zen Buddhism is kind of the way the Japanese take Buddhism and make it their own. They digest it, and out comes something more unique and more Japanese. So with Zen Buddhism, self-reliance, meditation, devotion. So you see a lot of these Zen gardens where Japanese can go and relax and meditate and kind of get in touch with nature in some ways too. So it's this blending of both Buddhism and Shintoism. They get new dramas, no plays, kabuki, paintings, again, Chinese influence, but they really kind of put their own style. And so here's another example of a Zen garden. So that's what happens with Japanese culture.